are talking today about Bitcoin and whether or not it is more than money and what else it can be used for other than kind of the traditional understanding most of us have as a peer-to-peer payment network. So I'm Jessica Levesque, and I'm C4's Executive Director, and we are joined today by Rodney, our Certified Bitcoin Professional Chair. Rodney, do you want to do an intro?
Sure. My name is Rodney McInnes. I am the Chief Risk Officer and AML Compliance Ninja at Outlier Compliance Group. And as Jessica said, I am currently the chair of this committee.
It's true, Rodney.
I know, it still feels weird to say.
And then we have a special guest with us today because we're going to be talking about Sidechains. And Paul, do you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. I'm Paul Stortz, author of BIPs 300 and 301, which are known as Drivechain, the founder and CEO of Layer 2 Labs, which is a Bitcoin company that works on sidechains and drivechains. This technology lets you send Bitcoin to other pieces of software and back, so you can have a sidechain that has a different block size, or a sidechain that emulates privacy features of Zcash, or emulates what Ethereum does, or really does anything. That's kind of the point, is that if there's something out there that software can do and that the users like and the users are paying transaction fees for, then this would allow the Bitcoin system to access that as an optional L2. So that's sort of what I'm working on.
Seems like a knowledgeable person to cover sidechains and drivechains.
Yeah, that was back.
I would agree.
300 was originally back in November 2015. So it's very old, and I've been interested in it ever since. And it's a very neglected topic. It deserves much more attention than it gets. It's much better than a lot of other ideas that are out
there. Okay, so I'm just checking to make sure. I'm not sure if your video is showing up on, or that we can hear you on the screen. I'm just gonna check and make sure that that's happening. But let's get a little bit into, I think we should just start with, I guess, why we're talking about Bitcoin as more than money and what the sort of debate is around that, because there are different opinions on what Bitcoin should be used for and how the network should be used. Some people think that it should just be used in the way that it was originally intended, as a peer-to-peer payment network, and that's kind of the end of it. But there are other people that think that there are opportunities for us to build on it and to use the security of the network to do a number of different things. And we've heard about scaling for many years, and one of the scaling solutions we recently covered on a live stream was about the Lightning Network. And so the Lightning Network is a faster version of Bitcoin, if you can explain it like that, I guess. But it's a way to make transactions reconcile off chain and then go back on chain, and it's so that you can speed up how we're using Bitcoin, basically, in faster transactions. Have either of you ever used Lightning or had some experience with it, and maybe you want to explain what it's used for?
I have experience, but Paul, go for it.
Yeah, I've certainly used the Lightning Network, and I was enthusiastic about it in 2016. I was writing some Lightning technology myself for use in a different thing. It's a prediction market thing that is sort of similar to what Polymarket is like now. And then later on, I think it was 2018, I wrote this thing about fraud proofs that relied on payment channels, which the Lightning Network is made up of payment channels. I was very excited about it at first, but since basically 2021, I have concluded that it's probably like a dead end. And this is becoming slowly a more and more popular opinion. I did a post called Lightning Limitations in February 2022, or maybe April, off of some Bitcoin dev mailing list emails that I had sent. And then ever since then, people have taken that phrase, lightning limitations, and they've done like a little panel with it. And recently there was this Op Next conference at the MicroStrategy headquarters. That was on Saturday, Friday, Saturday, and it's a very popular opinion now among the people who presented there that Lightning is not going to work out and that we have to move on to a different L2 to scale Bitcoin.
I think this is one of the,
Interesting.
like to Jessica's point, really emphasizes one of the really neat features of Bitcoin is it's an open ledger. So you can kind of make and do whatever you want with it, and whatever is the most functional, the most user friendly, the most whatever you want to call it, is most likely to have the most support as well. And so we at C4 very much try to keep our own personal opinions, thoughts, and feelings out of it, and just present the information. Obviously, Paul has some pretty deep background within that particular space. And for the most part, I think whatever is going to prevail will be whatever functions in the most ideal way. So whether that is Lightning, whether that is something else, I'm not here to hazard a guess because I've definitely not lost Bitcoin trying to guess particular things in the past. So let's just not do that, and we'll keep the guessing out of my realm and Jessica's as well.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so we know that one of the solutions for, at least for scaling for payments, has been Lightning, and there are others we're not going to get into, but there's this other really interesting idea called sidechains. It's not really an idea, it's become a reality. And there is a problem that it's been trying to solve. Basically, the problem is that Bitcoin has limited functionality. Would you agree with that, Paul and Rodney? That that is an argument people are making, that it has limited functionality.
Yeah, absolutely. And the limit is also partly intentional. You know, it's mostly a feature instead of a bug, because
Exactly.
to take the famous block size example, every single transaction that people make on the network must be stored, validated, and then served back as if each Bitcoin node is like a little server. You're responsible for giving all those blocks back to people who want them, so that the network can regenerate if people start trying to shut it down. So in many ways, the limitations are the key to Bitcoin's success. But that's the flip side to that coin, which is then people can release a different piece of software that does something else, even if that's kind of a trivial thing. Like Litecoin had the slightly faster 2.5 minute blocks, and instead of 10 minutes. And then, you have very, very experimental things, use like Ethereum, and then they're pushing that to Solana and these experiments where it's more and more difficult to run a full node, but the other aspects are maybe slightly better for the user, lower fees, faster blocks, um, more features. So the sidechain is a way to try to have the cake and eat it too, where we say L1 stops changing, and L1 is just, it is what it is with its small block size and its high decentralization and its tightly controlled full node costs. And then you have these zones, these different L2s, the sidechains, which are just a blockchain that starts with no Bitcoin on it. You send Bitcoin to those from the L1 chain, from Bitcoin L1. And then once they're over there, it's as if you have Solana or whatever you like over there.
So basically, sidechains, they can build new stuff. I know stuff is not the technical word that we would use for it, but that's the word I'm going to use. But so it allows new things that have been built to move back and forth between the main chain and the side chain without overloading the main chain, correct?
That's right.
I know it's very technical with the stuff, and you, I'm sure, can understand that, Paul, since you wrote bits 300 and 301. I'm sure that that was part of it. Do you want to walk us through a little bit about why you decided to write these bits? Like, what
Right.
inspired you? Why did you think that this was a problem that needed to be solved?
Well, there was this block size dispute had been going for years and years and years. Even by 2013, 2014, it was tearing people apart. And there was much more to it than merely a disagreement about the block size. It was actually tied up in all these questions like if there's a dispute between people in Bitcoin, how is it resolved? And it was kind of like, if we're saying that the block size won't change, then is this going to be the case that nothing will change? And if so, that kind of is a ticking time bomb, because it's like people are going to keep coming up with new ideas. Inevitably, one or two of those ideas is going to be pretty good. And then it's kind of like, so it was tied up in all these really big questions. But even the scalability question alone, even though that's a very narrow question, it's kind of a matter of life or death, because if we reach a point where there's some network that gets adoption by more people, you have 8 billion people using, Litecoin or something, to just take kind of an example, then I personally just don't think that there's any room for a second coin. If one coin gets to 8 billion users and other coins do not, then I just think there's no room for those other coins. They're going to go to zero, and they'll just be like a novelty, they'll be like Pokemon cards or some collectible or something. So the block size war was heating up, and I was a small blocker, and I was a believer in Lightning, and I thought that'd be fine. But I thought, why can't the large blockers just get what they want? I looked into the details, and I thought, well, we can make it so that the small block people are on the small block network, and then there's a parallel large block network that has, the 8 MB block size that, Mike Kern wanted for Bitcoin XT or whatever. I thought you can just send coins from one to the other, and then how do you get the coins back? Can you send coins there and have them change hands on the L2 and then pull them back to the L1? And that was the question that was really interesting to me. Not only did it affect scaling, but there were all these other new ideas at the time. Many of the ideas were terrible, but there were a few good ideas. A lot of the ideas were terrible. I was a huge Ethereum skeptic, like in 2015. I sort of still am, although the Ethereum of today is a million times better than the Ethereum of 2015, which was completely a terrible idea. Now it's sort of less than mediocre. But basically, that one clue was that right after Bitcoin had been invented, Satoshi invented Namecoin. He was the co-inventor of Namecoin and the co-inventor of merge mining. So Satoshi was already thinking, if you read the thread where Satoshi invented merge mining, he mentions many times that there will be lots of different blockchains of all shapes and sizes, and that they should all be merge mined with Bitcoin. They can all pay fees. They can all be in this share proof of work.
Can you do
And so,
sorry, can you just do a quick 10,000-foot view of merge mining?
Yeah.
merge mining is a very interesting technique invented by Satoshi in 2010, and it's we've been using it continuously ever since, I think it was coded in 2011. And what it does is it's a way of mining, and it's a way of setting up an altcoin. Oh, okay, so the 10,000 view is you can mine multiple blockchains at once and collect all the fees. So you have your miners running, and they're doing basically exactly what they did before, except now they're mining for Bitcoin blocks and Namecoin blocks at the same time. So that's the really, really, really high view. I could zoom in a little more if you want, but
That's good for now.
But it's a very interesting.
That's good for now. We can get into it a little bit more in a bit.
So let me try to wrap up your original question about like how I got into this. Well, I kind of realized we can have everyone be happy. The large blockers and small blockers can get what they want, and people who want new features such as Namecoin type feature, we could get it on a Bitcoin L2. We wouldn't need Namecoin, the altcoin. And finally, I was very interested in this prediction markets side, and I still am. I wanted to have prediction markets on Bitcoin, and that's the origin of my Twitter handle, TruthCoin, which was a peer-to-peer oracle system and prediction marketplace for Bitcoin. But it was so convoluted that there was no way to put it on Bitcoin in a normal way. It would have to exist on its own chain. So all of these things drove my interest in, like, how can you push the boundaries of the blockchain technology in new ways, but use that without sort of screwing up L1. And that's how I got so interested in this topic. And a lot of people were interested in it too. Of course, Blockstream wrote that paper in October 2014. And Gavin Andreessen had a tweet like, if this amazing company offers you a job, you had better take it. This was before everyone, the block size war ripped everyone apart. But this was originally like a holy grail type of a thing. This was seen as really, really important. And there's a long debate over whether or not they could be used to scale Bitcoin. Blockstream really thought that they could not, and Greg Maxwell thought that they could not. But I now, over the last 10 years, my view on that has totally shifted, and now I think that the sidechain is going to be the only way to scale Bitcoin, and probably nothing else will work for a wide variety of reasons that I could explain if you want. But that's so I got into it, for a lot of reasons, and the reasons have kept piling on ever since. And now I think it's really like a very, very important thing that Bitcoin go full throttle on this sidechain idea.
So, Paul, I was listening to a talk you gave, I think like 4 or 5 years ago, just trying to get a little bit more familiar with Drivechain and what you've been working on. And one of the things you said is Bitcoin seems great, but can it do blank? Whatever that blank is. I'm not sure if you still talk about it from that. Yeah. Do you remember? Yeah.
I like the stick figures.
2021. I did too. It was interesting. And I think that it's an interesting question. Seems great, but can it do blank? Which I think is where this conversation kind of comes from for you. It does a lot of things. It does a few things, and it does them really, really well, Bitcoin in general. So we've got these side chains. And one of the things you also talked about was how using side chains enables us to have more creativity and innovation. Do you want to talk a little bit about, like, from a use case perspective, what it is that I want us to get into the tech a little bit and like get more into merge mining and all that stuff. But first, just like, yeah, I guess, what is it actually doing? What do we want to have happen? And what is like your project Drivechain and other side chains? What are they doing that can make the people who are using Bitcoin have more options?
Sure. I'll try to like build it up from like a low creativity one to like a more creative, but the low creativity would just be scaling Bitcoin. And that is basically you just copy Bitcoin Core and you increase the block size, but as an L2 and as an optional L2, this is the night and day difference between on L1, like a hard fork to increase the L1 block size has all these problems. But as an optional L2, it really doesn't have any of these problems because the optional L2 can just be ignored by people, or it can even fail. It can become too expensive to run a full node of the L2 and it just collapses. But since it was an optional L2, it doesn't make any difference. So it's kind of like your pacemaker failing, or there's like a big food court at a mall and there's all these stores and one of the restaurants fails. Well, that doesn't actually matter that much because there's just lots of other options. And so you actually want entrepreneurs, you really want that delusional optimal, that entrepreneur who has that delusional optimism to start that restaurant and give you that option, and then you give it a try. So just having an optional L2 that has a larger block size. I have this plan that I call a 1313. We have a 13 geographically distributed L2s that start with a block size. It's like 12.92. So it starts with that and then grows geometrically over time. But that system is capable of processing like several trillion transactions per year, which is the whole as far as I could estimate, all 100% of the transaction volume of Earth. So it's not very creative, but it's a pretty, it's the payment, taking the payments use case and blowing it up to planetary scale at a cost of like 10 cents per transaction, and having all this work without giving all this money to the miners, the L1 miners, which would be hundreds of billions of dollars a year in transaction fees, but without affecting L1. The only effect on L1 is the BIP 300, which is just a little counter that counts to 13,000. So that's scaling would be not that, that's like the low creativity bar. Then if we were to move up a little bit, we could just clone some of the useful altcoins. So for example, Zcash and Monero have this privacy technology that Bitcoin doesn't have. And even when Michael Saylor was pressed by Peter McCormack to say, well, what about these people who want privacy? Even Michael Saylor, who's like the big uber maximalist, has this thing where he's like, well, yeah, you know what? Maybe you do need a Monero. He has this famous quote where they've got the soundbite of him saying, maybe you do need Monero, and he goes on to say basically that Bitcoin should not adopt certain features because that might make it too effective at doing certain things, which will have this effect on how it's perceived. It might be perceived as an illegal coin or whatever, but he literally says something like, you don't want Bitcoin to be that good. So he's arguing against a quality piece of software in a way. So we'll talk about that. But these are even the lower ones because we're just like copying stuff that exists. There are new ideas, I think, that are pretty good and worth trying. So one is that I've rewritten Namecoin a little bit. I haven't finished, but this is out and you can download it from layer2labs.com/download. But I have something that I call Bitnames, which is like basically Namecoin, but instead of the altcoin Namecoin, it's as a layer 2. What this could do is, slowly replace how we log in on the internet, and it can. I wrote a long post about this on my blog, and what we currently do is very unsatisfying in many ways. Where you have to when you host a website, you have to pay for HTTPS. You have to renew the domain name every year. That doesn't really make sense. The domain names can be seized, whereas with Namecoin, you have this unseizable name, and you have the ability to find people and connect with them. It deters spam since the transaction fee means so. It's basically have this phone book of everyone on the internet, and you can contact anyone you want. It's maybe more expensive to contact. Who would it be, like Taylor Swift or someone, or Barack Obama? It'll cost more, but you can contact anyone, and they can never take, you just own whatever it is, edwardsnowden.com or Barack, and then you could send encrypted messages to people. So that's more on the higher side where it's a fringe idea. It may or may not pan out. But a lot of how we do authentication and navigating the internet is terrible, which is why you have these things, sometimes called the walled gardens or the silos, where it's like Elon Musk wants you to do everything through X, and he doesn't want you to hyperlink out. He wants you to write a long article in X, and so people just say,
oh yes,
the internet
there's a
doesn't
reason
work.
why we're not live on LinkedIn right now or on X,
Yeah.
because of those exact problems.
Exactly.
You mean Twitter?
Yeah, I know. I've only just started calling. I was calling it Twitter for a long time. I'm started to call it I
As
kind of
soon as
actually
we all
called it
get used
X.
to saying X, it'll be something
I
else.
called it
That's
X
how it'll
just
refer.
then almost as a pejorative to say how silly it is, because I think Elon is a pretty cool guy overall. I think it is silly how he oh, sorry. Oh, can you hear somebody? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you fine. We'll
Something
move away from the political side of things though, because that could be a really
yes, of course. But I was thinking that the thing about X is it, like I was saying, this is kind of Elon's project to put everything in X probably won't work because people want to own their own lives, and if you don't have control over it, you can be deplatformed at any time. So this is another thing, is the shadow banning and the deplatforming. So I go into this in writing in my article, which you may but yeah, it's
What's
just
the name of the article, Paul? It's on
truthcoin.info is where my blog
truthcoin.info.
is, and if you search bit
Okay.
names or if you click the archives at the top. So I go
Okay.
into a lot of this stuff. So yet another thing is this prediction markets idea, which is, I've always been a huge believer in this idea. This lets you bet on things that you think will happen in the future, but it requires a way to resolve the bet. So you say, oh, I think it's going to rain tomorrow. The bet has to pay off a certain way if it really does rain, and it has to pay off a different way if it does not. And so that's a pretty tough question, and that's what's called the Oracle problem. That was what I originally set out to solve back in 2015, which I think I sort of have a decent attempt at it. So these are fringe things that, you wouldn't want them on Bitcoin L1 because you have no idea if the thing is going to work or if it'll have any users. But at the same time, we really don't want to turn people away. If there's someone out there who really believes in an idea, this is like the person in the food court, and who's like, oh, I really want to start my restaurant, and if they really, really want to do it, then as consumers, it's much better for us to have this new option. Oh, someone's going to open a new Indian fusion restaurant or something. And we're like, okay, well, maybe it'll be good. So, and you can see how people have just been making stuff, ever since Bitcoin came out, there's been more and more and more R&D and creativity. And so the question is, are we just going to say that it's like a sour grapes, and we're going to say, well, we never really wanted that anyway. We never really wanted privacy on Bitcoin anyway, even though that's flatly untrue and clearly, many people do. So that's a long, but you asked, those are some examples, maybe 4 examples, but it's quite, I think it could go on and on, but that's just a little bit.
No, that was good. That was super helpful. It's interesting to think about it. I like how you kind of ratcheted up the creativity a bit on that. So, Paul, your project, Drivechain, is comparable in some ways. It has some similar, I guess, things to other scaling solutions, other side chains, but it's different. So I was thinking maybe we could talk a little bit about Drivechain, but then also talk about Liquid Network and Rootstock, and just give a overview of what the differences are, what the goals are. I know you mentioned Adam Back earlier, and Adam Back's Blockstream, I'm not telling you this, I'm telling the audience, is what his company does, Liquid Network. So yeah, maybe we want to get into the differences between those things and what they're each trying to solve for. Rodney, I don't know if you have anything you want to jump in and say before he gets into these projects.
No, I'm just enjoying kind of listening to it. I'm familiar enough with most of these, but it's nice to hear someone that is like deep in the weeds on this stuff talk about it.
I feel the same way. Yeah, let's nerd out, Paul.
All right, yeah, I'm in the weeds over here. There's a lot of weeding we have to do. So Blockstream, and not everyone who worked at Blockstream, but most of the co-authors of this October 2014 paper about sidechains. That was this first paper. And in the paper, they have this thing in Appendix A where they say basically, until we get this sidechain, a peer-to-peer sidechain system working, what you can do is temporarily, you can have this multi-sig group, which is just like an 11 or 15 multi-sig on L1. There's a bunch of people, and we're going to give each of them one of the keys, one of the magic 15 keys, and they can run like a server. And so these 15 people can be like the custodians of the sidechain. And that they said that would be like a temporary thing to hold off until the real sidechain technology was finished. And this is a temporary thing that has ended up being permanent because it lasted to this day, and that's what Liquid is called. And there's actually a bit of controversy about this. So even Matt Corallo, one of the people who wrote the paper, one of the co-founders of Blockstream, one of the co-creators of Liquid, he left Blockstream to work for Chaincode, I think, in New York. And then I only saying this because he said it publicly on Twitter many times, but he was like, Liquid is not supposed to be. Liquid is originally like designed for like a niche use case of people who already are on exchanges trying to send money to other exchanges, and it's because I think presumably the exchanges are some of the people who have the 15 keys. So this was, according to them and me. See, I bring this up because according to them, this was supposed to be like a temporary band-aid, and where Blockstream runs the software. The software wasn't even open source until, I spent years like pointing out that it wasn't open source, and then eventually they open sourced, I think, part of it, not even all of it. And with Liquid, all the transaction fees go to a wallet controlled by Blockstream, which is partly a moot point because these fees are very, very low because the activity is very, very low. At some point, Samson Mao, who worked for Blockstream, I think made the his Aqua wallet or something, which used Liquid, and that got some use out of Liquid. But Liquid to me is a very unsatisfying thing, because it does not represent what I regard as the true sort of decentralized vision of the sidechain. In contrast, my idea is very miner centric. So in my idea, there are no fixed 15 people. There's just a decentralized, there's just a part of the code where you can propose the sidechain, then miners can activate the sidechain without changing any code in Bitcoin or doing anything else. It's just all taken care of by BIP 300. And then once the sidechain is on, you can send coins to it and they will show up over there, and then you can pull the coins back. And miners automatically collect transaction fee revenue from the L2. The miners get the transaction fees, not a wallet controlled by Blockstream. Liquid is its own piece of software, so you can't like use Liquid to copy Zcash or Ethereum. Liquid is like its own single thing, whereas Drivechain is just like the bridge back and forth. So I mentioned before we could like clone Zcash, or we could clone Monero, we could clone Ethereum, we could write our own prediction market sidechain or write our own Namecoin sidechain. So, and this is in the case of Rootstock as well. Rootstock originally was supposed to be like Ethereum as an L2 on Bitcoin. I think they're still kind of orbiting that goal, but they want. But Ethereum, Rootstock, as I remember it, or RSK, that is one specific idea. So I don't know if I'm conveying this point very well, but the drive chain is like how you get back and forth, and you would have multiple different drive chains. Some would be copying Ethereum, some would be copying Zcash, some would just be a large block size. So Liquid, it's just like it's a little bit easier thing to do, and the question that Blockstream faced was, will we work with what we have that works today, or will we try some new thing? And so they mostly went the former way, and I went sort of the latter way. I was like, I will try to push the boundary on this decentralized sidechain idea. The drawback of Liquid is that the 15 people control all the money on this chain, and we don't really know who they are. I mean, in theory, I think the theory behind that was that their reputation would prevent them from taking the money, but we don't even know who they are, and they might even be the same, just 15 copies of the same person. I don't think that's what it is, but we really don't know. So they don't want to, they've never released the names publicly of who the 15 people are. So I think they kind of want to have it both ways. They want to say this is private and it's no one's business, and we don't want these 15 people to be harassed or targeted or whatever. But then they also say that these 15 people are so trustworthy that we can trust them with all the money. And to me, one of the biggest advantages of Drivechain, my idea, is that it does pay the miners its transaction fees. This is a very important issue to me because I anticipate that if Bitcoin is a success, those fee revenues will be really, really high. So I'm imagining 8 billion users paying 10 cents a transaction, 3 transactions like a day. I'm talking like hundreds of billions of dollars per year. Huge amount of money. That will have to take place on some L2 because it won't fit on L1. So I'm saying, okay, let's imagine the successful scenario. It involves, even at 10 cents per transaction, which is pretty low, it's hundreds of billions of dollars per year. It also grows at a rate of about 7% a year. I did the exact math on a different post that I published, but it doubles basically every 11 years. So even if it was only 1 cent per transaction, it would be a huge amount of money. So the question is, if this money is, who's this money going to go to, this transaction fee revenue? And if it doesn't go to miners, then the miners will look over at the L2 and they'll say, you know what, why don't we just start this up? Why doesn't Foundry Mining just start up Foundry LSP, Foundry Lightning Service Provider, or Foundry Arc, because why would they get a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of money, whereas the L2 is raking in all this money that's just growing and, it has more and more money over time. So my view is that the L2, yes.
I just want to jump in, and I was wondering if we could kind of look at an analogy maybe to explain the differences
Sure.
between these. So we know Bitcoin's like, it's decentralized. The idea is this decentralized town, it's secure, it's stable, long-term value. There's clear rules, clear infrastructure, all of that. And then there's, like a connecting village, which is Drivechain. But is the idea, and clarify if I'm incorrect, that Drivechain anybody is able to participate in because the miners, it's merged mining, the miners are mining both sides. Whereas if we talk about something like Liquid, not anybody is able to actually do these merges. I guess it's not called the same thing, but it's because it's like a private village. You have to be invited into it versus Drivechain where
I think this
anyone's
is very
able to
close to the
participate on
main
the back
idea.
end.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would definitely agree that
Okay.
I would say something like, one thing when people bring up Liquid, I say, well, how would we use Liquid to add Zcash privacy technology to Bitcoin? And then they just
Mm-hmm.
stare blankly at me because there actually is no way, because Blockstream released what they released. That is what Liquid is. And it's sort of like, if you wanted to do this again, like if you wanted to create a privacy sidechain for Bitcoin, you would have to find like
Mm-hmm.
15 new people and make a new multi-sig setup. And so you see, the idea is actually kind of very empty, because the most of the idea is the picking of the 15 people and blessing those as the trustworthy people and saying that we trust them to send the coin when you request a withdrawal, that they'll really send it to you. So
So, and
it
with
is worse than that.
Drivechain, you're trusting the miners that are
Right. You are
mining
trusting the
on both
miners.
sides.
The
How many
miners can
miners
withdraw.
are doing both?
Well, merge mining has
You know?
is much more popular than you might think. Drivechain is currently only on the testnet, but you can look at, for example, like for a long time, Namecoin was only worth, like, the Namecoin block was worth like $5, and the Bitcoin
Mm-hmm.
block was worth like $3,000, $7,000. So it was 1,000 to 1 for a long time, but still there was more than the percentage of miners who were merge mining Namecoin. I think it only ever fell to like 54% or something, was the lowest. So it's very interesting that a lot of miners would merge mine, and that they have been doing this for many years. Even back in the early days when the Namecoin full node would crash, and it would like bring the whole mining uh, network down, if the because you were trying to mine both. Of course, they've improved all that now, but it's interesting that it's just, the amounts are very small, and yet it is a popular thing. I think BitMEX Research wrote a long post about merge mining that I've sent people to, so they have graphs about that. But I
And
think
then,
most actual
oh,
miners
go ahead.
don't know a lot about it, of course, because miners are mostly the end miners they're focused on cheap electricity, getting the newest ASICs. They have their specialty. They're all specialists, and so the people running the pools, they would merge mine. They would sell the altcoins that they merge mine for BTC and just credit. And so a lot of people don't know about it. It's very unknown. It's a very interesting that way that the miners really don't know that much about. Many of the miners are just like, if you go to some of these, I've gone to like certain mining conferences and just even Bitcoin meetups that are focused on mining. They're really very uninterested in the Bitcoin technology, and they don't. They're really like focused on how can we get to the site, how can we build a structure, to hold the miners, how do we get the electricity there, and so it's interesting that specialization has taken us very far in that direction.
Yeah, this is interesting, I think, to hear about. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is how do two-way pegs work? Do you want to explain that a little bit?
I can
In
try,
terms
yes.
of how it's
In
high level,
Drivechain,
if you can, yeah, if you want to, but
yes. I
I'm
had an
interested to
analogy
learn
that I
more.
I had an analogy that I used that some people liked about there's like the ads when people want to rob the Apple store, they coordinate a big group of people to all run in there at the same time, grab a bunch of stuff, and then just run out, really quickly. So the speed is what makes the theft work. Whereas in Drivechain, it's kind of like when you leave a prison, or if you see like Law and Order, where you got to get buzzed through those gates, where they knock on the door and then they
Yep.
buzz. The one gate unlocks and they go next and they close the door and then they buzz them through the second gate. So Drivechain is kind of like you have these long gates that are like 13,000 blocks long. So the withdrawals are very, very, very slow intentionally. And that's because if it's very difficult to get away with doing the wrong thing, the L2 will be has a little hash that shows what the correct withdrawal should be for this whole 3-month period. And then the actual withdrawal that's happening on L1 has its own hash. And if you want to steal the money, you basically have to have the wrong hash be out there for 3 months as it slowly goes through these little gates, because that's like the approval process. So there's a flip side of the explanation. This sort of two separate things have to be explained at once, which is why would the end user put up with waiting 3 months for a withdrawal? People would think, oh, no one would ever put up with that. But it's two sides of the same coin. So the idea of Drivechain is that there is this very slow withdrawal that is very secure and is very reliable. The miners control this bundle of withdrawals that traverses these gates over 3 months. And so it's very likely that this withdrawal will be correct, because in order for it to be incorrect, you have to do the wrong thing in public for 3 months. So that's the one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is that regular users would not use this system. They'll just swap out. You can do these atomic swaps using HTLCs, which are the same thing they used in the Lightning Network.
Mm-hmm.
So a regular user can just instantly swap. So there's a different metaphor for this. I got lots of metaphors, so I don't know if it's but the easiest way to learn is to try our software, because we actually have software out and people can kind of see what happens. But I'm going to go with the metaphors anyway. So one is like, you're at a casino. The L2 is like the casino. You bring a thing of cash to the casino. You deposit it to the L2. You get poker chips. Now you're in the L2. You're in the casino world. Because the deposits in Drivechain, going in one direction is very easy. It's instant and it always works. But it's the withdrawals that are the difficult part. So you go to the casino. You put down $800 and they give you chips. Now you're in the L2. You're gambling with the chips, and you're doing these would be the new features like the Zcash privacy or the prediction markets or something, the scaling. You're in the casino, you do an unlimited number of transactions with the poker chips. Because of merge mining, the L1 miners are still making money off of these poker chip things, but they're not on L1. These are not transactions with cash. So they're not on L1, they're only on the L2. You got all your poker chips. Now it comes time to cash out the poker chips, go back to L1, and you want US dollars again. You want cash. So what you do is, on one sense, there's the slow, secure withdrawal, where only one bundle of withdrawals can be processed every 3 months. That's too slow, but what people do is they, in front of the withdrawal counter at the casino, they have set up like a little tent or a little table. And they say, well, we will buy your casino chips off of you for like whatever, 99 cents on the dollar or 99.5 cents on the dollar, whatever it is. And because the BIP 300 can only process one withdrawal every 3 to 6 months. And the withdrawal can only contain like 6,000 destinations maximum. So that's the drawback. But the reason is it doesn't matter, because everyone will be using these tables in front, these little pop-up shops that pop up in front of the withdrawal counter. You say, okay, I got my chips, pay me out on L1 immediately, and I'll pay you 0.5% or whatever. And so then those people, the pop-up people shop, those are, as long as there's not more than 6,000 of those, they can all get their money 3 months later, and it's just time value of money. So it's shrunk what was originally an impossible problem to something that costs like 0.5%. So every regular user will swap out using the little these little like withdrawal facilitators. Those people may be minor. They might be Foundry or Antpool or something themselves, because then since they are miners, they know that they can walk the withdrawal slowly through the mining controlled BIP 300 peg. So the miners are buzzing it through each of all of the gates, the prison gates, slowly. So then when that's finished, BIP 300 credits those coins on Bitcoin L1. So that's the withdrawal. So I don't know if that's going to make any sense to
No,
anyone.
that makes a lot of sense. I really like that
Mhm.
idea of explaining it with a casino and going in and getting their chips and using it, and then you have to change it back. But it's easier. I like what you said about it. Easier being when you walk in. I mean, I can just picture walking into a casino. They make it very easy to put your money in, but there's obviously
Right.
a lot of things that go into taking your money back out and switching it, and different rules that you have to follow and go along with. So that's a good example. That's a good example for a lot of things that are happening on layer 2. So
Right. The
thank you for
L2,
sharing that example.
every Lightning node or every Drivechain node must be L1 node. So the deposits are very, very easy. The L2 can just watch L1 and say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, there's a deposit, credit immediately. So it doesn't go the other way around, because L1 is not running L2. So that's why the other way is much harder. And that's why it has to be this slow miner controlled peg thing. So hopefully that
That
made a
makes
little bit of
sense.
sense.
No, it did make sense. I thought that was really helpful. I haven't heard it explained like that before, and I appreciated that for sure. We are getting close to the end of our time. Rodney, did you have anything else you wanted to ask Paul or throw into the conversation? And same question to you, Paul.
I'm good. We front loaded a lot of the information, so I've got my questions answered, which is much appreciated.
Yeah, it's always nice when somebody else does the work for you. Thank you, Paul.
Correct.
Any other things you wanted to add for our listeners?
I'd just like to re-emphasize that if you have I want to draw a distinction between the mined L2s and the non-mined L2s. So like Lightning, Liquid, even Arc, the new Covenant stuff, these
Yep.
are L2s that are not controlled by miners, and they don't pay their transaction fees to miners. And that might sound like a small detail, but I really think actually it is the kiss of death, because it means that eventually you'll either have vertical integration or a conflict between the miners and the L2. And the conflict between the L1 and the L2, the miners have all the bullets. It's like a war where you have no weapons, because the L1 miners can filter messages out from the L2. For example, Lightning relies on this transaction called the justice transaction, hitting the blockchain in time if someone tries to steal from you. But if your counterpart is a miner, or if there's some kind of deal or collusion, the miners can just never put that transaction in a block, and then the entire Lightning network is insecure and doesn't work. And then the vertical integration is just, that would be like Foundry LSP, Foundry Lightning Service Provider. Well, in that case, as I've just explained, since the miners win, if there's any conflict between L1 and L2, it puts people in a bizarre situation where you open Foundry is the Lightning service provider, or they're the Arc supernode Covenant provider. You open a channel with them, but now the whole Lightning technology is useless, because they have a lot of hash rate, and they can defeat the Lightning network with their hash rate. So, and this is just Foundry doing what would make perfect sense to them. They would look around and see, oh, there's tons of money being made by these L2s. This happens in Ethereum. This already happened in Ethereum several times, where there's a lot of people making money on transaction fees. Why don't we make that money? And so just by doing what is completely natural for them, they would end up in a situation where the whole Lightning Network security model is just like, window dressing or something. So you want the miners to have an aligned incentive with the network, where they where we have more users who are happy, who are really getting something out of Bitcoin, who are paying transaction fees, where that is going up and miner revenues are going up and the proof of work securing the network is going up. A very healthy situation is when all this is aligned and you have all the same people making a lot of money and using, where the miners are loyal to the real users of Bitcoin, because that's where they get their, bread and butter, so to speak. They have all these real users who are actually using it every day. That is a much more stable situation. It would be really hard to replace Bitcoin in that world. Whereas the other scenarios are very unstable. Like if all the money goes to one ARC supernode, one Covenant supernode, or where Bitcoin is viewed as something other than a thing that people use every day. Like we use email every day. We really use the internet. We use IP v4 addresses. Like we really, things that are actually used, there's an actual staying power to them. Whereas if it's just like a stock ticker symbol, then it's kind of like if we replace that with something else, then what's the, who's going to suffer as a result or who will complain as a result. So that's why I'm really focused on the stuff that I am working on. So
Well, we can
only
definitely
the
tell that
mind
you're
L2
passionate
yeah.
about what you're working on, which I think is one. I mean, I think it's great. You're the founder of Layer 2 Labs. You should have your opinions. You should be promoting that what you're, working on is something that you believe in. Obviously, there are opposing views to what you said, Paul, and I do think it's important to just kind of end with a note that at C4, we're not advocating for any of these specific sidechain scaling solutions. We're just presenting the information. And I think we learned a lot today from you, Paul, about what one of the options is and your thoughts around it and what some of the pros and cons are about Drivechain and your perspective on some of the pros and I would say mostly cons about some of the other scaling solutions or side chains. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective with us. I feel like I learned a lot. Rodney, what else have you?
I very much appreciate you spending the time to share your insights and what you've been working on and what you're passionate about. That is, I think, a good underscore into the topic that we're going to be doing a few more live streams on, which is, what can Bitcoin do besides send value from one person to another? The joys of open source software and the ability to, within reason, do what you want, also comes with the other side of that, of people disagreeing that that's, what they want to do with it or the best path forward or what have you. It is an interesting kind of conundrum in the space as Bitcoin has grown to the size it has. There's more people involved in that decision, and so it's really interesting to see kind of some of the potential use cases, some of the other options that are out there, some of the lesser known elements. It's really neat to see, and I think again it really helps kind of drive home the fact that the potential for what Bitcoin can do is, I don't want to say endless, but I mean it is pretty vast. So yeah, thank you very much for being here and sharing your expertise. That is much appreciated.
Yes, thank you so
Yeah, my
much,
pleasure.
Paul.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. And tune in next time, everyone watching. We're going to get more into Bitcoin, what it can be used for other than money. This conversation is very large, lots of different opinions and thoughts, but we're going to talk more about some of the other things that are going on in the ecosystem and how the technology is being used. So thank you, Paul, for joining us. We appreciate your insights, your opinions, and your knowledge on all of the information you shared today. Rodney, as always, thank you for joining. I appreciate you being our chair, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you.
Thanks for your help, Jessica.
Thank you.